now we are in the third of our four-part series. Now we're going to look at symbolic interactionism. In the previous video, we looked at the other two macro theories, right? Structural functionalism and conflict theory, see what they would have to say about deviance. Now let's look at our one micro theory, right? Symbolic interactionism, and they have some interesting things to tell us about deviance as well. Right, so remember, symbolic interactionism is this idea that interaction shapes our social world, shapes social structure, and of course in these interactions we're exchanging symbols, right? Symbols, remember, is just anything that stands for something else. Of course, the most common type of symbol we're exchanging in these interactions is language, right? So it's all about meaning. What do things mean to people? What's going on in these interactions? So meaning plays a really big role in how they understand deviance. Right? So according to symbolic interactionism, deviance is socially constructed and deviant behavior is learned. In other words, nobody is inherently deviant. Or very few people are inherently, make, quote, bad choices. Rather that we learn it from other people, right? We learn it through interactions. Interactions is where deviance comes from. But we're going to break that down into two sort of sub-theories of symbolic interactionism, right? They both are focused on meaning, but a little bit different in terms of their focus. So one is differential association theory. Big fancy word for something we probably are all familiar with, right? This is a theory that deviance is learned by associating with people who commit deviant acts, right? Hanging out with the, quote, bad kids, being worried about your kids' friends, these sorts of things, right? In fact, there's lots of research to back this up. Interesting study done on the effects of on your behavior of your college roommate, right? So a New York Times article talked about how who you live with will affect how much alcohol you use. It will affect how well you do in school, positive or negative, right? So this is probably the one we're more familiar with, differential association theory. We learn deviance through other people. Now, labeling theory, also falling under symbolic interactionism, is a little bit different, right? They argue that being deviant, it doesn't necessarily come out of interaction. Deviance comes from people become deviant by being labeled as such by people in positions of power and authority, right? Behaviors and individuals become deviant only when people with some social power label them as deviant. Once people labeled so accept this categorization, they begin to consider themselves deviant and act accordingly, right? So this is the idea, if you get labeled the bad kid in kindergarten, right, by a teacher, a principal, a school counselor, this idea is that this label starts to stick to you, right? And now you're going to be the bad kid in first grade and second grade. And not only does the label start to stick to you, but you start to internalize this, right? If people are labeling you the bad kid, there's a chance that you start making bad choices. And of course, that label came from a person in a position of power and authority, in this case, a teacher, a principal, or a counselor. This is why I had you watch the video, The Medicated Child, right? Because it gets to this issue of the rising rates of diagnosed ADD, ADHD, these behavioral disorders. There's a growing debate whether, are these disorders going up because there's actually more people with these disorders, or are we simply labeling what was previously considered normal behavior abnormal and thus applying this label of deviance to young people? Right? So again, if you look at the data, it's kind of striking. I encourage you, I put the link on Canvas to watch this video, but we're seeing a dramatic increase in the number of people being diagnosed with ADHD. In fact, the figures show that an estimated 6.4 million children ages 4 to 17 have received an ADHD diagnosis at some point in their lives, a 16% increase since 2007, and a 41% rise in the past decade. These are huge numbers, and I think symbolic interactionism has some interesting things to offer us when we think about why are these numbers going up, right? Or is this a real phenomenon, or is it simply we're labeling people as such? Okay, so come back for our part 4 in this 4-part series. We're going to talk about subcultures and countercultures.